Why are there not more people talking about Ibn Taymiyyah? He helped shape Islamic ideas. Let me tell you something cool. Ibn Taymiyyah lived a long time ago, but his words still inspire people today. He loved learning and always asked big questions. Lots of Muslims remember him for his brave ideas and strong faith. Isn't that amazing? Imam Ibni Taymiyyah, the revivalist of the 7th century Hijri, and an outstanding mujahid of the pen and the sword. Introduction. His name was Ahmad, his kunyat Abul Abbas, and his title Taqiyuddin. His lineage is as follows: Ahmed bin Abdul Halim bin Abdus Salam bin Abdullah, bin Khizr bin Muhammad bin ul Khizr bin Ali bin Abdullah bin Taymiyyah al-Harani. Although his name was Ahmad, he was famous by the name of Ibni Taymiyyah. According to some traditions, Imam Ibni Taymiyyah's distant paternal grandmother was Taymiyyah, who was such a learned and accomplished scholar that the whole family became associated with her name. Birth: Ibn Taymiyyah was born on the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, 661 AH in the historical Syrian city of Haran. Family background: Ibn Taymiyyah belonged to a highly intellectual family of scholars. For generations his family had gained eminence for their scholarship, piety, and devotion to Islam. His paternal grandfather Abdus Salam was a well-known scholar of the Hanbali school of thought and a matchless orator. He spent his entire life preaching Islam by giving lectures and writing books. Many of his literary works are still available to us. His father, Sheikh Abdul Halim, was also accomplished in the sciences of his time. After the death of his father, Abdus Salam, he succeeded him as the Khatib of Haran Mosque and at the same time had the honor of giving sermons and lectures at Madrasa Nouriya. He gained fame for his well-researched sermons and his scholarly insight. These were tumultuous times for the Muslim world as it had come under attack of the Tartars. In 667 AH, when Ibni Taymiyyah was only 6 years old, his hometown fell to the Tartars. In the dire conditions that prevailed, his family was forced to leave home and head towards Damascus. Since there were no animals available to carry their belongings, Ibni Taymiyyah's family had no choice but to leave everything behind except their books and a few essential items. The journey was full of perils, and there was constant fear of attack from the Tartars. Apart from looking after the women and children on this treacherous journey, Ibn Taymiyyah's father also had to pull the cart full of books due to scarcity of animals. Laden with its literary treasures, the caravan finally managed to reach Damascus. Soon the word spread that this scholarly family had arrived in Damascus. His father and grandfather had an established reputation in the field of learning, and within a few days, Ibn Taymiyyah's father was chosen to give sermons at Darul Hadith Zakaria. In addition, he was also appointed as the Khatib of Jamia Masjid Umvi. It should be kept in mind that proving oneself as an intellectual and scholar in a center of learning like Damascus was not an easy task. Education and upbringing: Ibn Taymiyyah had acquired his early education in Haran. After reaching Damascus, he studied a range of subjects at Madrasa Hanbaliya and Darul Hadith Zakaria. He memorized the Quran in a short period. Despite his young age, he used to attend his father's lectures and take part in the scholarly discussions that ensued. Ibn Taymiyyah did not have any real interest in activities involving fun and games. Once his father was taking his children out to a recreation park, but Ibn Taymiyyah chose not to join them. In the evening when they returned from the excursion, his father expressed his disappointment. "Ahmad, I wish you could have gone with us. Today's outing was really interesting." Ahmad replied, pointing towards the book in his hand. "Father, how could I memorize this book if I went with you?" Surprised, his father asked, "Have you memorized the whole book?" Ahmad replied in the affirmative. Upon his father's request, he recited the whole book to him. His father was overjoyed and embraced him with love. Ibn Taymiyyah's memory was so extraordinary that he needed to read a book only once in order to memorize it. While his father and grandfather also possessed great power of retention, Ibn Taymiyyah was particularly gifted and amazed his teachers by his quick and accurate memory skills. Soon he gained fame all over Damascus. Once a religious scholar was visiting Damascus from Halb. Having learnt about Ibn Taymiyyah's great memory power, He wanted to meet him and test his memory. He decided to sit on the road that led to his school so that he could meet Ibni Taymiyyah on his way back from school. On seeing him, a tailor pointed towards him and told the scholar that this was the child that he had been waiting to meet. The scholar decided to put him to test with a few ahadith. He would write a hadith and its narrators on a small tablet, make Ibn Taymiyyah read it once, remove the tablet, and then ask him to recite it. He did this numerous times with different ahadith and their narrators, and each time he would recite each and every word accurately. Seeing this, the sheikh remarked, "If this boy lives, he is going to achieve something big in life because I have never seen anyone possess such an incredible memory." Tafsir, interpretation of the Quran, was Ibni Taymiyyah's favorite subject, which led him to study innumerable books of tafsir. He relates himself, "Sometimes I used to study up to 100 books of tafsir for the explanation of one verse of the Quran. After this, I would pray to Allah to grant me understanding of that verse. I would plead, 'O the teacher of Adam and Ibrahim, enlighten me.' I would make my way to deserted places in mosques, rub dust on my forehead and pray to Allah, 'O the one who taught Ibrahim, grant me understanding.'" Apart from spending time on memorization and tafsir of the Quran, he also devoted time to learning hadith sciences from over 200 scholars. He managed to study Musnad Ahmad and the 6 authentic books of hadith, Sahih Sita, several times with different teachers. His mastery in hadith was such that none was comparable to him in the field. So much so that people started doubting the authenticity of a hadith if Ibn Taymiyyah did not have knowledge of it. He was instructed in fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, by his father, who was the leading expert during that time. He also studied fiqh under the guidance of the Chief Justice Abu Muhammad Abdur Rahman and renowned scholar Sheikh Zainuddin. Ibn Taymiyyah acquired knowledge of all the prevailing sciences of his time. He paid special attention to Arabic. He became an expert in Arabic grammar, vocabulary, history of the Arabic language, literature, and the poetry of the past and present writers. His mastery over Arabic grammar was proven by the fact that after thoroughly analyzing Al-Kitab, written by the leading expert of grammar Imam Saiboya, he managed to point out its mistakes and weak points. He also studied Islamic history in depth. He analyzed the conditions prevailing in the pre-Islamic era and the early Arab generations as well. Among the scholars and general public of the time, the Ash'ari, a school of thought with a particular religious philosophy, were famous for their ilm ul kalam. The followers of the Hanbali school of thought were generally considered in opposition to Ash'ari. During religious debates and dialogues, the Ash'ari were often more convincing with their logical and philosophical explanations, while the Hanbali scholars dealt more with the apparent meaning of the Quranic verses and the ahadith, much more than the underlying logic or philosophy. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah recognized this and did such an in-depth study of philosophy, ilm ul kalam, and logic that he became aware of the weaknesses in these sciences and those of the scholars of Greece, who were considered the godfathers of logic and philosophy. He wrote scholarly books of such caliber critiquing these sciences that nobody could challenge them. Ibn Taymiyyah also studied mathematics and calligraphy. All in all, he prepared himself in every way to fulfill the need of the time, which was to prove that Islam was the religion of truth in the face of prevailing philosophies. He learnt the use of all the weapons that his opponents and critics of Islam were equipped with. Allama Zahabi writes about him, "Ahmad was still quite young when he started participating in religious discourses. His amazing display of intellect at these discussions and debates astounded many great scholars. At this time, his age was 19 years or less." Hafiz Sirajuddin writes in his book, "There was hardly any book pertaining to arts and sciences that Ahmad was not familiar with. It seemed that Ahmad was the only one that was bestowed by Allah with an amazing power of retention and the gift of remembering everything he read." The Imam was around 19 years old when, after seeing his extraordinary aptitude and abilities, the Chief Justice of Syria, Sharfuddin Abul Abbas Ahmad al-Maqdisi, gave him the authority to issue fatwa, religious verdict. Ibn Taymiyyah starts teaching. When Ibn Taymiyyah was 21 years old, his father Abdul Halim passed away. He was chosen to succeed his father as the Shaykh-ul-Hadith at Dar-ul-Hadith Zakaria. On 2nd Muharram, 683 AH, he delivered his first sermon. As was the tradition, scholars, chief justice, and the nobility of the city were present at the inaugural sermon. This was a difficult test that every new teacher had to go through. In this lecture, the Imam discussed the different attributes of Bismillah with such eloquence that it left his audience thoroughly impressed with his vast knowledge, discerning intellect, way of argumentation, and delivery. People realized that the Imam was blessed with extraordinary abilities and was poised to accomplish something great. The following month, Imam Sahib gave a lecture on tafsir, Quranic interpretation, at Jamia Umvi in place of his father. Ibni Kathir writes that while delivering his tafsir lectures, he would extensively refer from modern sciences and contemporary knowledge of the time. This made him highly popular, and the number of attendees grew every day. Soon his fame spread far and wide. The primary basis of his tafsir was different verses of the Quran, since some verses of the Quran explain the other verses, followed by ahadith, and then the sayings of the Prophet's companions. Instead of false and fabricated narrations, his speeches would be supported by facts from the life of the Prophet, and the companions. His deep insight disclosed so many new facts that weeks would be spent on a single verse of the Quran. It took him years to finish the tafsir of Surah Nur. Hafiz Sirajuddin Hafs Omar writes, when Imam Taymiyyah would start his lecture, Allah would open for him the gates of knowledge, wisdom, and insight. He supported every claim with verses from the Quran, ahadith, sayings of the scholars, and verses of the Arab poets. His words would flow like the waves of the sea. During the sermon, he would keep his eyes closed. All the people present would be awestruck by his dignified personality. When he would open his eyes after the sermon, it seemed as if he had just returned from another world. For 15 years he taught in total peace. In 695 AH, after the death of Sheikh Zain-ul-Abidin, the most notable scholar of the Hanbali school of thought, Imam Sahib was appointed as Shaykh-ul-Hadith in Dar-ul-Hadith Hanbaliya. At a time when Ibni Taymiyyah was busy in his ideological jihad, his country once again came under the attack of Tartars, and he proved his excellence in the field of jihad with the sword in addition to jihad with the tongue. The mischief of the Tartars. The unfortunate events that befell the Islamic world in the 7th century were unprecedented in the annals of history. The Muslims had become negligent and unmindful of their faith. Allah's fury thus descended upon them in the form of the Tartars. Let us briefly narrate what led to the start of these unfortunate events. The Tartars originally came from Mongolia, a part of the Gobi Desert, a barren area with hardly any sign of civilization. The Tartars were wild and barbaric. They used to eat dog meat and use animal skin to cover themselves. Their various tribes were often at war amongst themselves, until the time that Genghis Khan managed to subdue most of the tribal chiefs and strengthened his rule. His empire gradually spread from the Gobi Desert to China and Turkmenistan. He also gave significant boost to the progress and development of the Tartars. During this time, Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah had a vast empire in the eastern part of the Islamic world. In order to establish trade relations, Genghis Khan sent a delegation of merchants whom Khwarizm Shah killed without any solid reason. When an emissary was sent to inquire about this massacre, even he was killed by Khwarizm Shah. This news enraged Genghis Khan. He climbed up a hill and in solitude reflected on this whole incident. Burning with anger, he returned to his people and said, "There cannot be two rulers on land just like there cannot be two suns in the sky." Genghis Khan gathered a huge army and attacked Khwarizm Shah. Soon his army gained control of Bokhara, Samarkand, Ray, Hamdan, Zanjan, and Nishapur. He destroyed whatever came his way and moved on. Even though Khwarizm Shah was at that time the most powerful ruler in the Islamic world, the terror of the Tartars had him on the run. He eventually reached an island where he died and did not even get a proper burial. The attacks by the Tartars not only humiliated the Muslims, but the entire Islamic world was shaken from its foundations by their terror. No other nation had ever faced such destruction. The Tartars were a barbaric nation and brought about a lot of destruction. Entire cities would be torched and their population killed without making any exception for women, children, and the elderly. They would slit open the stomachs of pregnant women and kill their children. Such events had terrified the Muslims, and they were overcome with shame and dejection. Combating and defeating the Tartars seemed impossible and unbelievable to the Muslims. Cowardice had set in to the extent that a solitary Tartar soldier would walk into a village and single-handedly kill the people like sheep and cattle, and no one had the courage to stand up against him. While Muslims were the main victims, the effects of these horrific events were felt by the entire civilized world, which was shaken by the destruction caused by the Tartars. They did not let harsh weather conditions, mountains, seas, famine, or plague stand in their way. After Genghis Khan's death, his sons and grandsons continued with the wave of destruction that he had unleashed. In 656 AH, Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu Khan invaded Baghdad, the most advanced city of the world. It was also the metropolis of the Islamic world and a center of learning. Baghdad was a marvelous city such that its gardens, markets, houses, factories, and educational institutions were unparalleled in the world. However, at the same time there was great moral decay in the society. When Caliph Mu'tasim received the news that Hulagu Khan was approaching Baghdad, he was busy enjoying music surrounded by his beautiful slave girls. His minister Ibni al-Kami, a traitor, deceived him into believing that there was no danger. On the other hand, the state of the religious scholars was such that at the time of the attack, they were busy debating whether Burak, the animal on which the Prophet rode on the night of Miraj, was male or female. When the condition of a nation is such, then Allah deals with them severely. Thus, after a brief resistance, Baghdad fell to Hulagu Khan. The Caliph and the city's nobility were killed in the first stage of the battle. For 40 days, the Tartars killed indiscriminately and filled the city streets with dead bodies. Baghdad's great library containing millions of priceless books was burnt to ashes. For weeks, the waters of River Tigris ran black from the ink of the books and the blood of the massacred people. There was no sign of civilization left, and the great Baghdad was ruined. The whole Islamic world would have been washed away by the torrent, but luckily the preaching of Islam got started amongst the Tartars. It was the power of preaching that within a century the entire Tartar nation embraced Islam. However, due to lack of proper Islamic training, they continued to attack their Muslim brothers. Jihad in the way of Allah. Before we take a look at Imam Taymiyyah's participation in jihad and his great achievements as a warrior, it is necessary to briefly review the political conditions of those times. 13 years before the birth of Imam Taymiyyah, the slave kings started ruling Egypt and Syria. These were the Turkish slaves of Najmuddin Ayyub, the last king from Salahuddin Ayyubi's family, who were settled in Egypt on account of their bravery and loyalty. Izzuddin Aybek, who usurped the throne, was one of them. In 657 AH, just 3 years before the birth of Ibni Taymiyyah, his slave Saifuddin gained control of the throne and defeated the Tartars. Ruknuddin Bebrus, another slave of Najmuddin, murdered Saifuddin and took over the reins of the government. This was the time of Ibni Taymiyyah's birth and childhood. With great pomp and grandeur, he ruled for 18 years and defeated the Tartars many times. After that, the caliphs changed frequently till Al-Mansur Saifuddin Kalawun ascended the throne. He crushed the Tartars in 678 AH and ruled with great splendor for 12 years. In 709 AH, his son Al-Malik al-Nasir rose to power and ruled for 32 years. He was the contemporary of Ibn Taymiyyah. Since Egypt had control over Syria at that time, the Sultan's deputy or governor was appointed to look after its affairs. In 699 AH, Syria was terror-stricken, as rumors were rife that Tartars were about to attack. The Sultan of Egypt, Malik Nasir, himself took part in the encounter. The confrontation took place outside Damascus, in which Nasir's army suffered defeat at the hands of Sultan Kazan, the Tartar king. The news that the Egyptian army had been driven out caused panic. The rich and the elite of Egypt started leaving. The government officials left and chaos reached a point where jails were broken and there was looting and plundering everywhere. In the midst of all these troubles, the citizens were further agonized by the thought of the Tartars coming and creating more havoc in their lives. This state of affairs made Ibn Taymiyyah very restless. Together with a few scholars and companions, he set out to meet Kazan to reach a peace agreement for the people of Damascus. Kamaluddin al-Anja, who was present on the occasion, narrates, "I was with Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah on this occasion. He started reciting to the king the Quranic verses and the ahadith enjoining fairness and just conduct. His voice gradually rising, he was drawing nearer to the king until his knees were about to touch those of Kazan. He was listening attentively and did not seem to be displeased with this. He was in such awe of him that he asked the people around him, 'Who is this scholar? I have never seen a man like him, nor have I ever seen anyone as brave and courageous as him.' Ibn Taymiyyah said to Kazan, 'You claim to be Muslim, and I have been told that you have with you imams, jurists, and scholars. Yet you have deemed it proper to march upon Muslims. Your father and grandfather refrained from such acts. They kept their promises while you broke yours, and you oppressed the servants of Allah.' On this occasion, food was served, but Ibn Taymiyyah refused to join in with everyone. When insisted, he said that it was not lawful to eat this food as it was prepared from the cattle of poor Muslims without their permission and cooked on wood from their trees. When Kazan requested him to make dua, prayer, he did so in these words, 'O Allah, if Kazan is waging war in your way and to exalt your name, then help him, and if his intention is greed and expanding his empire, then you take revenge from him.' The strange part was that when the sheikh was making dua, Kazan was saying Ameen. Our state was such that we were pulling our clothes closer to our bodies, expecting that the executioner will cut off Ibn Taymiyyah's head at the king's order, and we would be splattered with his blood. When the gathering was dismissed and we came out of the courtroom, we told him that he almost had us killed, and that we were not prepared to accompany him to the journey back to Damascus. He replied that he was also not prepared to go with us. He stated, 'The one who fears anyone except Allah has a sickness in his heart.' We left, but Imam Sahib stayed on for a while. A number of prisoners were set free on his recommendation. On hearing this good news, a lot of people gathered, and with great honor he reached Damascus, accompanied by 300 riders. On the other hand, we were still on our way when we got attacked by a gang which even stripped us of our clothes. After some time, Kazan returned to his capital city of Tabriz, where political situation had taken an adverse turn. He left his commander Amir Bolai with an army of 60,000 to protect Syria. This army started plunder and pillage in the outskirts of Syria. Ibn Taymiyyah met Amir Bolai and got some prisoners freed. After a few days, news came that Sultan Nasir was setting out with the Egyptian army to free Syria. On hearing this news, the Tartars fled immediately. At this time, Damascus had no ruler, so there was disorder and destruction everywhere. During these times, Ibn Taymiyyah's routine was to patrol the city the whole night and persuade people to prepare for jihad and exercise patience in those difficult times. When the deputy ruler Jamaluddin reached Damascus, the first thing he did was to plan an invasion to eradicate the tribesmen who supported Kazan. Ibn Taymiyyah took part in this expedition. Upon hearing the news of his arrival, the tribal chiefs came to meet him. Impressed by his sermons, they repented by the grace of Allah and gave assurances that they would return what they had looted from the people. Thus, for the time being, Syria was saved from all internal and external dangers. The following year, the news of Tartars' decision to attack again caused chaos and confusion. When people decided to leave for Egypt, Imam Sahib stressed upon them the excellence and obligation of jihad, and the disgrace and dishonor associated with leaving the battlefield. The news that the Egyptian ruler was coming himself with the army gave some comfort to the people. However, later, the news came that he had gone back to Cairo. When Imam Sahib found out, he himself went to Cairo to convince the Sultan to fight against Kazan and his army. During the meeting, the Sultan gave all kinds of excuses. Ibn Taymiyyah told him with distaste that even if he were not the ruler of Syria, it was his obligation to help his fellow Muslim brothers. Being the ruler, it was incumbent upon him to be their guardian, and if he did not fulfill his duty, he would be answerable to Allah. He said that if the Sultan was not concerned about Syria's safety, then he should say it so that the people of Syria could nominate a ruler who would protect them in times of danger. After that, he assured him that truth is always victorious, and Allah will be their guardian and defender. Impressed by his speech and his conviction, the Sultan decided to fight Kazan. The Egyptian army set out, and Ibni Taymiyyah gave the good news to the people of Damascus that the Sultan was coming with his army to defend Syria. At the same time, news came that bad weather conditions had forced the Tartar army to return to Iraq, and that the danger was no more. After 2 years in 702 AH, the Tartars set out to attack Syria once again. This caused a stir amongst the people, but soon the Egyptian forces reached Damascus. Imam Ibni Taymiyyah would encourage the residents, commanders and soldiers and assure them they would be victorious. When people would ask him to at least say Inshallah, his reply would be that the people of Syria were oppressed, and according to Allah's promise, their victory was guaranteed. On 2nd Ramadan 702 AH, the Syrian and the Egyptian armies stood in their ranks ready to face the Tartars. Imam Sahib gave the fatwa, religious verdict, not to fast so that the soldiers do not feel weak during the battle. He himself broke his fast in front of the leaders and the commanders. The battle began, and furious fighting ensued. Imam Sahib asked one of the commanders to show him the place where death was assured. He made him stand at a place where the enemy's arrows would rain down on him. The commander narrates that Imam Sahib raised his eyes toward the sky, supplicated for a while, then took his sword out of its sheath and pounced on the enemy like an eagle, soon disappearing from sight. It was only after Asr time, when the Tartars were defeated, that people saw the Imam come out of the battlefield safe and sound. At night the Tartars sought refuge in the mountains, but the Egyptian army had surrounded them from all sides. Some died when they were struck by arrows, some fell in the valleys whilst trying to flee, and others drowned in the river Euphrates. Thus the Tartars suffered a historic and comprehensive defeat. Religious Reformation, opposition and its causes. Before we take a look at Imam Ibni Taymiyyah's achievements as an Islamic revivalist and reformist, we need to know the intellectual and spiritual mindset of the people of the time and why there was a need for this revivalist movement. If we analyze the prevailing conditions in the 7th century Hijri, we see that false and baseless beliefs had replaced the easy and simple teachings of Islam. The followers of these beliefs had formed different groups and were holding Islam and the Muslim Ummah hostage. The true picture of Islam had been distorted, with new conspiracies surfacing time and again. In the following pages we will review how Ibni Taymiyyah single-handedly defended Islam on various fronts at the same time. Shirk and veneration of tombs. Due to the interaction of Muslim society with large non-Muslim communities and nations, un-Islamic customs, practices and polytheistic doctrines had become common. People had elevated the dead saints to the status of God, and the caretakers of these graves were given the position of prophets. People would pray facing the dead person in the grave, and also beg forgiveness from them. They would consider visiting their sheikhs and imams more important than going for Hajj pilgrimage. Their audacity had reached a point where they would sacrifice their animals with the words, "In the name of my Lord, Sheikh or Imam." As a consequence, mosques had lost their importance, and people had built fake tombs and graves everywhere. Imam Sahib used his speech and writing power to contradict these polytheistic beliefs. In his publications, he made it clear that supplicating to anyone other than Allah is haram, prohibited, and that there is no room for these practices in the Islamic Sharia. Ibni Taymiyyah explained that Tawheed is the central message of the prophets and the essence of Islam. His efforts were not wasted, and the concept of Tawheed came alive again amongst the general public. Philosophical tradition. The second issue facing Ibn Taymiyyah was related to the followers of Ilm ul-Kalam and philosophy. Although Ilm ul-Kalam had been invented to combat philosophy, over a period of time the spirit of philosophy had seeped into Ilm ul-Kalam itself. Excessive use of Greek terminology, stating one's views in a long and complicated manner, the insistence on using logic to prove the veracity of beliefs, were the characteristics of Ilm ul Kalam. On top of everything, the greatness and sanctity of Aristotle had reached a point where his investigations were considered the final word in any issue. All this had transformed Ilm ul Kalam into a mixture of strange and absurd ideas. At that time, Nasiruddin Tusi had great influence, and in his opinion, Greek philosophy and logic had superiority over everything else. While the general public was in awe of Tusi, the scholars of hadith and fiqh were unable to defend their views as they were generally unfamiliar with the finer points of this science. At this point, Imam Ibni Taymiyyah stood up and did a fine job of intellectually critiquing Greek philosophy in order to objectively analyze its worth. Without any prejudice, he acknowledged the useful contribution of the Greeks in the fields of physics and mathematics. However, as far as beliefs are concerned, he deemed the philosophers unsuccessful and ignorant. In his various books, he pinpointed the specific mistakes committed by the philosophers. He would use logic to analyze and refute the arguments presented in complex philosophical debates. In this way, he took the Islamic world out of the spell that had been cast on them in the last few centuries by the sciences of philosophy and logic. The original simple teachings of Islam once again assumed prominence. He convinced the people that the foundation of these sciences should be on reflection and reason, and not blind confirmation, taqlid. Thus, scholars of any time have a right to critically analyze these sciences and reject whatever is against reason. In this way, at a time of intellectual stagnation, Ibni Taymiyyah's criticism of Greek philosophy opened new doors of ijtihad, reasoning based on religious principles. Unislamic tasawwuf, Sufism. The Sufis were very popular amongst a vast majority of people at that time. The customs of different religions, especially Hinduism, were practiced in the name of Islam to the point that Islamic Sharia was not important to them anymore. The belief of one spirit moving into the body of another, the philosophy of Wadat ul Wujud, unity of creation, the concept that Sharia laws can be suspended for Sufis are some of the examples. Some branches of Sufism had stooped down to the lowest levels of deceit by using magical tricks to impress the public. Both the common man and the nobility held these Sufis in high esteem. The concept of Wahdat ul Wujud was exaggerated to the point that after Ibn Arabi, Talmisani went to the extent of saying that the entire Quran is full of shirk because it differentiates between the creator and the creation, while true Tawhid was found only in their writings. The followers of the Jahmiyyah sect started worshipping the creations of Allah to the point that the lowliest of creation was worshipped because it was considered God. On top of this, the followers of this sect would commit the most shameful of sins and try to justify them on account of their beliefs. Some would be in love with girls and say that they could see the splendor of Allah in them. Some would embrace their loved one and call them God. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a letter to Sheikh Nasr bin Sulaiman in this regard, calling upon him to leave Ibn Arabi's Unislamic beliefs, especially Wadat ul Wujud. Sheikh Nasr had an influence over the ruling class, and even though they did not have an answer to his arguments, this whole group became Imam Sahib's arch-enemy, the Batiniya sect. Another sect that caused a lot of harm to the Muslims was the Batiniya sect. Their teachings were a mixture of Zoroastrian beliefs, Plutonic doctrines, and evil political motives. Its followers always helped non-Muslim powers and external forces against the Muslims. During the Crusaders' attacks on Syria and Palestine, they sided with the Crusaders. Even after the end of the Crusades, they were busy planning conspiracies and rebellions against the Muslims. When Syria was attacked, they openly joined forces with the Tartars. When things became intolerable, the ruler of the time decided to take action against them and requested scholars to issue a fatwa regarding this matter. Not only did Imam Sahib declare that jihad against this sect was obligatory, but also wrote letters to the Muslims of other cities and invited them to participate in this jihad. Finally, a huge army of mujahideen, including Imam Sahib, defeated the Batiniya sect and dispersed their power. Incursion of Christian missionaries. Taking advantage of Muslims' political weakness in those times, the Christians had started a movement to prove the superiority of their religion. they started compiling books trying to prove the excellence of Christianity and criticizing the Sharia brought by Prophet Muhammad, S.A. A book from the Christians of Cyprus reached Syria trying to prove that Christianity was the true religion and that Muhammad, S.A., was sent down only to the people of Arabia, not to the whole of mankind. When this book started gaining popularity in the religious and intellectual circles of Syria, Ibni Taymiyyah addressed this issue in his book Al-Jawab al-Sahih liman Badala Dinul Masih. This book, comprising of 4 volumes, not only gave arguments to prove the prophethood of Muhammad, S.A., but also attacked the very foundations of Christianity. His analysis of the mistakes in their beliefs, history of Christianity, and changes made in their scriptures was so exhaustive that it did not seem like the work of one man. Sheikh Abu Zahra wrote in his book that this book alone was enough to prove Ibn Taymiyyah's immortality as a scholar and intellectual. Awakening of the spirit of ijtihad. The stagnation in the intellectual circles of Muslims was another thing that really distressed Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. Stepping out of one's school of thought was considered a crime, and no scholar would dare to come to a conclusion on any new issue facing the Muslims. Islamic jurisprudence had become stagnant, in stark contrast to the constant development and evolution of earlier centuries. In this situation, Imam Sahib made possible what was considered unachievable. Even though he belonged to the Hanbali school of thought, he considered the opinions of all the 4 imams and of the modern and classic scholars. In a number of matters, he came up with his own view. When Imam Sahib openly criticized some of the beliefs of these schools of thought, he earned immense displeasure from all sides. Even though opposition increased with each passing day, the Imam never retreated from his stance. The fact was that Imam Sahib's intellectual level was much above the people of his time, and when they came face to face with him, the realization of their inferior intellect led to feelings of jealousy. He would prevail wherever he went. People used to flock to his sermons. He was so convinced of being on the right path that he would use very harsh words about the innovators in religion and other off-track people of the society. He waged jihad with his pen and speech, and when the need arose, he would also try to remove evil from the root by using force as well. One day a pseudo-saint, wearing a long garment, was brought to him. His nails and hair were long, his language foul and abusive, and he was also an addict. Imam Sahib gave orders to get rid of his garment, cut his hair and nails, and made him give up his addiction and use of foul language. The people of Damascus had sanctified a stone in the Jamia Masjid, and polytheistic rituals were performed around it. Imam Sahib gave orders for the stone to be broken down and thrown away. Members of the Rifi sect tried to prove that they were the chosen ones by claiming that fire did not affect them. They challenged everyone that if they proved their claims right, then they should be accepted as being on the right path. Imam Sahib declared that these antics were deceitful, and whoever jumps in the fire, their body should be cleaned with grass and vinegar and then given a bath. And if someone continues with these antics, he should be declared as Dajjal. On hearing this, a Rifi Sufi admitted that their antics did not work against Sharia, but were popular among the Tartars. All these things made Imam Sahib extremely popular amongst the common people, but very unpopular among some sections of the society. In the future, he would face many trials and unfortunate events because of his beliefs. Ibn Taymiyyah's steadfastness in the face of trials and tribulations. In 690 AH, whilst giving a speech on the attributes of Allah, Imam Taymiyyah severely criticized the Ash'ari school of thought, which resulted in an open confrontation with the Shafi'i scholars. This was the first time he was openly criticized. Since Imam Sahib enjoyed the support of the Chief Justice, the Shafi'i scholars had to silence. In 698 AH, Ibn Taymiyyah wrote the book Al-Aqidat ul-Hamviyya in answer to a question regarding divine names and attributes. In the book, he supported the stance of the early period scholars and severely criticized the later era Ash'ari. This created quite a stir, and Imam Sahib was asked to justify the objections he had raised. His well-researched response silenced his critics. In the meantime, Sheikh Nasr, whom he had earlier written a letter asking him to leave the path of Ibni Arabi, became his arch-enemy. The deputy of the Sultan was a follower of Sheikh Nasser, and the latter convinced him that the Imam's influence could be a threat to the Sultan in Syria. The deputy was asked by Sultan Nasir to make sure there was nothing wrong with the Imam's beliefs. In connection with this, 3 gatherings were convened in which scholars scrutinized his beliefs. However, they could not find anything against the Sunnah of the Prophet, SAW. After reading the report of these proceedings, Sultan Nasir expressed his satisfaction. His opponents could not accept this defeat and convinced Sultan Nasir that since his deputy was himself a follower of the Imam, the probe conducted by him was not impartial. Thus an order was issued to Imam Sahib to present himself in front of the Sultan in Egypt. The day he was leaving Damascus, the whole city came out on the streets to bid him farewell. People were crying because they feared that a huge conspiracy was being planned against him. When he reached Egypt, a case was filed against him by the state, and he was recommended a severe punishment. When he saw the prejudiced attitude of the Chief Justice, he refused to speak for himself. The Chief Justice ordered Imam Sahib and his brothers to jail. His sermons in jail changed the lives of many people. During his absence, his followers were trying very hard to arrange a dialogue between Imam Sahib and his opponents. Finally, they were successful in achieving this. After the first day of discussion, his opponents did not have the courage to insist that he should be sent back to jail. Finally, after 18 months in captivity, he was set free. On the insistence of the people of Cairo, Imam Sahib stayed there for some time and started giving sermons at Jamia Hakimi. Only 5 months had passed since his release from jail, when in a Friday sermon, he criticized the beliefs of the Sufis. They could not tolerate this criticism and complained to the Sultan as well as filed a case against him in court. Imam Sahib gave such a powerful speech in his defense that the complainants were silenced and the court could not reach a verdict. Eventually, on the insistence of his opponents, Imam Sahib was given 3 choices by the ruler: to go to Damascus, to reside in Alexandria subject to certain conditions, or choose a life in captivity. Imam Sahib took the advice of his followers and decided to go back to Damascus. He was still on the way when an order was issued for his imprisonment. The deputy ruler, who was his opponent, realized that once Ibni Taymiyyah reached Damascus, he would again start his work with full freedom, creating trouble for him. Hence, without giving any reason, he was imprisoned for the second time. Most of the Imam's time in prison was spent in the remembrance of Allah and the recitation of the Quran. Whatever time was left, he would spend it in writing and preaching to his fellow prisoners. After some time, his brother was also arrested. In 708 AH, the deputy ruler Amir Birbas ousted Sultan Nasir. He knew that the Sultan had a soft spot for Imam Sahib. Birbas feared that the Imam's influence might create problems for him, so he sent him to Alexandria, which was a stronghold of the Sufis. Imam Sahib's critics were hoping that a prejudiced and intolerant Sufi would kill the Imam, and so they would get rid of him forever. The next year, Sultan Nasir succeeded in rising to power again. Amir Birbas was arrested and killed. Ibni Taymiyyah was released, and he was given a warm welcome on his arrival in the Sultan's court. On the insistence of the Sultan and the people, Imam Sahib stayed in Cairo for some time. After paying a visit to Baytul Maqdis, he returned to Damascus, where he busied himself in preaching and literary work. Once again, differences with the Sufis, religious innovators, bid'ati, and scholars of various schools of thought rose to the surface. His fatwa, religious verdicts, and publications were not well received as they were against the views of the scholars close to the ruler. The issue regarding undertaking to divorce became serious. Ibn Taymiyyah's viewpoint was different from other scholars. Similarly, there were some other issues where the Imam came in direct conflict with the scholars living under the umbrella of the government. The Chief Justice forbade him to issue any fatwa regarding this matter. Imam Sahib had a strong conviction on this matter, and thought it was improper for him to desist simply for the fear of the government. As a result, on 22 Rajab 720 AH, he was imprisoned again. After 5 months, when the anger of the scholars had cooled down, he was released. Imam Sahib spent the next 5 years preaching and teaching with full concentration as he had no restrictions on him. He wrote some new books and reviewed some of his earlier works. Since the scholars of that time had personal grudges against the Imam, they started conspiring against him once again. The fatwa that he had given 17 years ago regarding the visitation of graves became a topic of discussion again. According to his fatwa, it was unlawful in Sharia to undertake a journey merely to visit a grave. Ibni Taymiyyah had explained that instead of intending to visit the grave of the Holy Prophet, one's intention should be to offer prayers at the mosque of the Prophet. Also, at the time of visiting the Prophet's grave, one should recite the salam in the same manner as was done by the companions of the Prophet and the people immediately following them, ta'abin. His opponents raised many objections, and finally the government issued orders for his arrest. On receiving the news, he said, "I was expecting it. There is good hidden in this." The news of his arrest deeply saddened his followers, who wrote numerous letters to the Sultan requesting a reversal of this decision. His favorite pastime in jail was recitation of the Holy Quran. He also spent his time in answering questions related to fiqh. His work would be highly awaited outside the jail. In one of his works, he contradicted Qazi Abdullah bin al-Aknai and wrote that he had inadequate knowledge. This resulted in a complaint against him. The government confiscated his writing materials and paper. This was quite tough for the Imam, but he demonstrated patience and started writing with charcoal on loose sheets of paper. While in prison, he completed 80 recitals of the Quran. Death Imam Ibni Taymiyyah's health had started deteriorating while in jail. After a brief illness of 22 days, he died on 22 Zikad, 728 AH, at the age of 67 years. The news of his death stunned the entire city. Thousands of people attended his funeral. When his body was brought to Jamia Umvi, every street, market, and ground was packed with people. All the shops were closed and people did not care whether they had their meals or not. After the funeral prayer, everyone wanted to shoulder the coffin, and because of the large crowd, it was passing over people's heads. Handkerchiefs, turbans, and shoes were strewn everywhere, but nobody cared. The funeral procession had started out in the morning, but it was Asr time when the Imam was finally laid to rest. His funeral prayer in absence was performed throughout the Islamic world. In a remote city of China, his funeral prayer was announced in these words: "The funeral prayer of the conveyor of the Quranic message, Sheikh Ibni Taymiyyah, will now be offered." Imam's personality and praiseworthy attributes. The events that we have narrated in the preceding pages give an idea of Imam's intellectual level and his sense of honor for his religion. Even his contemporaries, who were also his opponents, acknowledged his intellectual brilliance. His critic, Kamaluddin Az-Zalmakani, says, "I have never seen a more complete individual than him. Allah had made the knowledge of all the sciences as easy for him as he had softened iron for Prophet Dawood. Whatever science he would be questioned about, he would answer in a manner that his audience would think that he had knowledge of this science only, and that no one else had mastered this knowledge like him." The Imam was as great a devotee of Allah as he was a scholar. After performing his Fajr prayer, he would sit in the same place till the sun had completely risen. During this time, he would busy himself in the remembrance of Allah and seeking his forgiveness. If someone would ask him about this, he would say, "This is my breakfast, and if I miss my breakfast, then my energy starts running out." After recitation of the Quran, he would answer questions on Islamic jurisprudence. Then he would instruct pupils of Dar-ul Hadith Sakariya and Dar-ul Hadith Hanbaliya till Zuhr time. After Asr, he would have a general gathering for everyone where all kinds of issues were discussed. After Maghrib prayer, he would again teach his students, and after Isha prayer, he would be busy in compilation and composition of his work till late in the night. During the nights, he would separate himself from everybody, he never married, and busy himself with the recitation of the Quran. Whilst reciting the Quran, tears would continuously flow down his face. He would keep himself occupied with the remembrance of Allah and Nawafil, optional prayers, till late. When he would begin the prayer, his limbs would tremble, and he would start shaking left and right. Ibni Taymiyyah was blessed with such a heart that he had no interest in worldly wealth and power. After being influenced by some rumors, the Sultan once asked him, "I hope you are not dreaming of taking over my empire." The Imam replied, "I would do that. I swear upon Allah that the Tartars' kingdom and your kingdom combined are not worth anything in my eyes." During his entire life, his opponents continued to try to bother him, but he was always patient with them, and this resolution increased with time. He used to say, "What can my enemies possibly do to me? My paradise is in my heart, and my garden is in my chest, inseparable from me. For me, prison is a place of solitude, execution is my opportunity for martyrdom, and exile from my town is but a chance to travel." Ibni Taymiyyah showed great magnanimity in forgiving his bloodthirsty enemies. When Sultan Nasir rose to power again, he decided to kill all the people that had caused the Imam pain and suffering. When the Imam found out, he stated emphatically that he would not take revenge from anyone, and on his insistence, the Sultan relented. It is impossible to cover all the matchless attributes and achievements of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah in this short essay. We will end with Hafiz Zahabi's words that have become our own opinion after reading about the Imam's life. When Hafiz Zahabi was exhausted from writing the Imam's praises in his book, he stated, "It is not apt for a person like me to describe someone of his stature. I swear that if I stand between Rukne Yamani and Maqam-e-Ibrahim facing the Kaaba, and swear that my eyes have never seen anyone like him, nor has he himself ever met his match, then I would be speaking the truth and would not have to atone for my oath." Compilations. Maulana Ataullah Hanif has named 582 of Imam Taymiyyah's literary works and compilations. They are categorized as follows: 102 of tafsir, 41 of hadith, 138 of fiqh and fatwa, 28 on the principles of fiqh, 126 on beliefs in ilm ul kalam, and 78 on ethics and tasawwuf, Sufism. An innumerable number of people benefited from Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. His renowned students included scholars like Ibn Qayyim, Hafiz Ibn Kathir, Hafiz Ibn Abdul Hadi, and Hafiz Zahabi.